The line went hot at 0940, and that was when Sergeant Ballard decided I was the morning's entertainment. I was standing at the ready bench with my rifle case at my feet, waiting my turn behind a class of trainees, when he walked the length of the firing points and stopped in front of me. He looked at my clean uniform. He looked at my case. He looked at the way I was standing, which was still the way you stand when you have done a thing 10,000 times and no longer need to fidget through it. "You lost, sweetheart," he said. I did not answer right away. On a range, you learn that most questions are not really questions. This one was for the boys behind him, 4 privates fresh out of 1 station unit training, and he wanted them to laugh. So I let him have the pause and said, "No, Sergeant, I'm on the roster." He picked up the clipboard hanging off the bench and made a show of reading it. He was young for the chevrons, maybe 27, with a good haircut, and the kind of confidence that has never once been tested by a person who could actually shoot. He found a name he decided was mine. He did not really read it. He was performing. "You ever fired one of these before?" he asked, and he tapped the case with the toe of his boot. Not hard. Just enough. "A few times," I said. "That got the first snicker from the privates." Ballard smiled like a man who had set a trap and watched something small walk into it. "Tell you what," he said, loud now, turning so the whole line could hear. "You're wasting brass, sweetheart. Some people just can't shoot. Nothing wrong with that. Not everybody's built for it." He spread his hands, generous, magnanimous, giving me permission to fail in front of an audience. "Take the far lane. Keep your muzzle downrange. Try not to hurt yourself." I had been shooting since before he could drive. My father put a rifle in my hands the year I turned 8, on a strip of packed dirt behind our barn in Pennsylvania, and he taught me the way he taught me everything, which was quietly, and only once, and with the expectation that I had been listening. I did not tell Ballard any of that. I said, "Roger, Sergeant," and I carried my case to the far lane. "I want you to understand something about that walk." It was maybe 40 feet. Every eye on the line followed me. The privates were grinning because a sergeant had told them it was safe to grin. Ballard was already turning back to his relay, done with me, filing me under the day's small pleasures. And I felt the old thing settle into my chest, the thing I have felt on a dozen ranges across 2 deployments in 15 years, the certainty that I was going to have to prove it again. Not once, not to be believed, but again, from the beginning, as if the last 15 years had never happened. I had been on that post for 3 days, 3 days of in-processing of finance in the personnel office and the housing desk, of standing in lines holding a folder, of nobody looking at the line on my orders that said what I was there to do. That is the thing about reporting in. You are a stranger, and a stack of paperwork, and a face nobody has learned yet. My orders said I was the incoming Brigade Master Marksmanship Trainer. But orders live in a folder, and a folder was in a drawer in an office I had not been given a key to yet, and out on the range, in the flat gray morning, I was just a clean uniform on the far lane. I had come to the range that morning to shoot a routine qualification, the same one every soldier on that post has to shoot, because I do not believe in running a marksmanship program from behind a desk. If I am going to hold soldiers to a standard, I am going to stand on the same line and shoot the same course and post the same score in the open, where anyone can see it. That is a rule I made for myself a long time ago, and I have never broken it. So I had signed onto the roster like anybody else, under my rank and my name, and I had waited my turn like anybody else, and Sergeant Ballard had looked at me and seen anybody else. I did not correct him. I want you to understand that this was a choice, and I made it on purpose. I could have said the sentence at the ready bench. I could have told him what my orders said and watched him swallow it. But I have learned that a man who needs to be told is not the same as a man who has learned, and I would rather a soldier learn a thing than be told it, even when the learning costs him something, especially then. So I let him send me to the far lane, and I carried my case, and I felt the old certainty settle into my chest that I was going to have to prove it again. And I made my peace with the morning the way I have made my peace with every morning like it. I set my case on the bench. I opened it. I did not hurry, because the target was going to say it for me. It always had. Here is what the far lane looked like from the inside. The wind was coming from the left rear, quartering, maybe 6 miles an hour, gusting to 9. I could read it off the range flags and off the mirage rising over the 200-meter line and off the way the grass laid down and stood back up in the low spots. The morning was cool, and the light was flat and even, which is a gift, because flat light does not lie to you about where the center of the target is. The firing points smelled like cut grass and gun oil, and the faint copper of spent brass baking on the concrete. I took my rifle out of the case. It was a service rifle. Nothing exotic, the same platform every soldier on that line was holding. I checked it the way you check a thing you trust, which is thoroughly and without drama. I seated the magazine. I found my natural point of aim by settling into the prone, closing my eyes, breathing out, and opening them to see where the sight had drifted. It had not drifted. I adjusted a quarter of my body anyway, because a quarter is the difference between a good group and a record. My father used to say the shot is already made before you touch the trigger. Everything after is just letting it go. The line went hot. Somewhere to my right, Ballard was calling commands for his trainees, riding them, telling one private his cheek weld was garbage, and another that he was jerking the trigger like he owed it money. Ordinary range noise. It fell away from me the way it always does when I get behind a rifle. Not because I am special, because I have done it enough that the world narrows to a sight picture and a heartbeat, and there is a great deal of quiet inside that narrowing, and I have spent my whole life walking toward that quiet. I breathed out. I let the front sight settle into the center of the black. I felt my pulse move the sight, up on the beat, down between, and I waited for the space between two beats, the little flat calm, and in that calm I pressed the trigger straight back until the rifle surprised me. The first round broke clean. I did not look to see where it went. Looking is a beginner's tell. I trusted it and cycled to the next. I fired my string the way I have fired 10,000 strings, one shot living entirely inside itself. No thought of the last, no thought of the next, each one a small, complete thing. The recoil came and went. The brass arced out and clicked on the concrete. The wind held, and I held with it, and when it gusted, I weighted it down, and when it settled, I sent the round into the settling. People think shooting is about the eyes. It is not. It is about the breath and the hands and the small, honest conversation between your heartbeat and your trigger finger. The eyes only tell you where. The rest of you decides whether you will be steady enough to put it there. I have big, steady hands, my father's hands, and I have a slow heart, slower than most, a thing the medics have remarked on my whole career, and on a firing line, a slow heart is a quiet gift because it gives you a longer, flat calm between the beats, and the flat calm is where the shot lives. I did not rush any of them. There is a temptation, when a man has told a whole line you cannot shoot, to hurry, to prove it fast, to snatch at the trigger, and let your anger send the round. Anger is the enemy of a good group. So is pride. So is the desire to show anybody anything. I emptied all of that out onto the concrete before the line went hot, the way I always do. And I shot the string cold and slow and empty for nobody, the way my father taught me, which is the only way I have ever known how. The last round broke. I lowered the rifle, cleared it, laid it on the bench with the bolt locked to the rear, and I sat back on my heels and waited. I did not look downrange either. I already knew. It was not the first time a man in charge had decided what I could and could not do with a rifle. The first time I was 21, at my first duty station, trying out for a squad-designated marksman slot that everyone in the platoon already knew was going to a corporal named Nobody you would remember, a corporal whose father had been a sergeant major, and who had never in his life put a round where he called it. I outshot him at every distance. I outshot everyone. And the instructor running the tryout, a staff sergeant with a jaw like a shovel, stood over my scorebook and said, "Nobody's handing you that slot, Marchetti. Not you didn't earn it. Not you weren't good enough. Nobody's handing you that slot." As if the slot were a favor and I had been rude enough to be the best. I remember the tryout in more detail than I remember most of my life, because it was the day I decided who I was going to be. There were 9 of us on the line, and I was the only woman, and everyone in the platoon had already written the ending. The corporal shot first. He was not bad. He was the kind of shooter who is good enough to believe he is very good, which is the most dangerous kind, because he has never had a reason to look hard at his own fundamentals. He shot his string and stood up grinning, and the staff sergeant clapped him on the shoulder, and I understood that the scores were almost beside the point, that the decision had been made in a room I would never be invited into, over coffee, by men who had known each other for years. Then I shot. And the thing about a scorebook is that it does not know about the room or the coffee or the years. It only knows where the holes are. I put my holes where the corporal could not, string after string, distance after distance, until the gap was not a matter of opinion. The staff sergeant walked my targets himself, twice, the way Ostrander would walk mine 9 years later, looking for a reason. There was no reason. There were only the holes in the center, again and again, keeping their honest count. "Nobody's handing you that slot, Marchetti," he said, standing over my scorebook. "I'm not asking anybody to hand me anything, Staff Sergeant," I said. "I'm asking you to read the book." He read the book. He did not want to. But he was not willing to write down a lie and sign it, and so, in the end, the book won. The way the book always wins if you make it lopsided enough that a lie would be too big to fit on the page. I got the slot. Nobody clapped me on the shoulder. I did not need them to. I had learned the only thing I would ever really need to know, which is that the truth is available to anyone patient enough to put it on paper where it cannot be argued with. So I took it, one target at a time. I made my scorebook so lopsided that giving the slot to the corporal would have required the instructor to write down a lie with his own hand and sign it. And whatever else he was not willing to sign it. I learned that day that the scorebook is the only advocate that never gets tired and never gets scared and never decides it likes somebody else better. Numbers do not care whose daughter you are. Numbers do not care that you are a woman on a line full of men who have already made up their minds. Numbers are the one thing on a range that cannot be intimidated. I carried that lesson into 2 deployments. The first one taught me what a rifle is actually for, which is a thing the ranges never quite tell you. I was a designated marksman with an infantry company, 22 years old, and for months the job was heat and boredom and the weight of the rifle and the sweat running into my eyes on an overwatch position while nothing happened. And then, twice, everything happened, and both times it happened in the space of a few seconds. And both times the difference between a soldier going home and a soldier not going home came down to whether the shot was already made before I touched the trigger. I am not going to tell you those stories in detail. They are not that kind of story, and the men they involve are owed better than to be turned into a moment in somebody else's telling. I will only say that I learned out there that the quiet I found behind the trigger on a strip of dirt behind a barn was not a luxury. It was the whole job. On a range, a bad day is a bad score. Out there, a bad day is a letter to a mother. I came back from that deployment understanding that marksmanship is not a sport and it is not a party trick, whatever a sergeant on a stateside line might think while he watches a stranger shoot. It is a promise you make to the person standing next to you. I have never once forgotten that, and I never let a soldier of mine forget it either. I carried that into the Army Marksmanship Unit, where I made the service rifle team the year I turned 24, and where for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who did not need me to prove anything because they had all proven the same thing themselves and knew exactly what it cost. There is a particular relief in that. To walk onto a line and not be the argument, to be for once just a shooter among shooters, judged by the only judge that has ever been fair to me, which is the paper at 200 meters. I did the best work of my life in those years, not because I was surrounded by praise, but because I was surrounded by people who had stopped needing to praise anybody, and who let the scorebook do the talking, and the scorebook and I had always understood each other. I carried it through the leg matches and the President's 100, through the Distinguished Rifleman badge, which is a small badge, and heavy, and which almost nobody outside the shooting community can even identify by sight. And I carried it that flat gray morning onto a lane at a post I had reported to 3 days earlier where a sergeant named Ballard had never heard my name and had already decided it did not matter. The weather that morning was the same weather as the tryout. Cool, quartering wind, flat light. The argument was the same argument, only the man was different. There is always a different man, and the argument is always the same. And I have made a kind of peace with that, the way you make peace with a chronic thing. You stop expecting it to be gone. You just get good at the morning it comes back. Sergeant Ballard walked down range to my target because he could not help himself. Range procedure said we would score after the relay finished and the line was cold and safe. But he came off his own firing point and started down the 200 meters toward the target line while I was still sitting back on my heels because he wanted to be the one to hold up my paper and read out the number and put the period at the end of the joke he had started. I watched him go. I did not stop him. Some things you have to let a man do to himself. He got to the 200-meter berm. He found my target, and I watched his walk change. You can read a lot in how a man stands over a target. A man who expects to find a scattered spray of misses stands loose, hips easy, one hand already reaching to tear the paper down and wave it like a flag. That was how Ballard walked up to it. And then he stopped, and his weight came off his heels and onto the balls of his feet, and his head tilted, and his reaching hand did not reach. He leaned in. He counted. I knew what he was seeing because I had seen it myself through the spotting scope before I ever stood up. My group was one ragged hole, not a spread of hits clustered near the center. One hole, torn a little wide by the rounds stacking on top of each other, the kind of group that does not look like marksmanship at all when you first find it. That looks instead like a mistake, like somebody fired once and you are miscounting until you put your finger to the paper and feel the edges, and realized that every round went through the same small place. A group like that is not a good day. It is a whole career compressed into 10 seconds of trigger control, and a man who has spent his life around ranges knows it the instant he understands what he is looking at. I could not hear him from the firing line, but I have watched enough men count enough targets to read the shape of it on his back. 1, then a pause. 2, 3, 4, and the pause got longer, and his shoulders came up around his ears, and he crouched down to put his eyes level with the paper, because from standing it did not make sense, and he thought maybe the angle was lying to him. It was not the angle. He straightened up and looked back at the firing line, at me, 200 meters away, a small figure sitting calm on the concrete, and even at that distance I saw the grin was gone off him. Not replaced with anger. Not yet. Replaced with the particular blankness of a man whose morning has stopped making the sense he built it on. "That's," he said, and his voice carried thin across the open ground. "That's not possible." And that was when Master Sergeant Ostrander came onto the range. He came the way senior people come onto a range without announcing himself, walking the line on a routine check with his hands behind his back and his eyes doing the arithmetic that 30 years teaches you to do without effort. He was 51 years old, and he had run marksmanship on that post longer than some of the trainees had been alive. He was the postmaster gunner. He was, though neither of us had said a word to each other yet, the single person on that installation most equipped to understand exactly what was sitting on the far lane. He saw Ballard downrange off procedure, which was wrong, and he opened his mouth to say so. Then he saw Ballard's face. He followed Ballard's stare back to me, and something in the old sergeant went still and careful, the way a man goes still when he steps on ground that might be more than ground. "Sergeant," Ostrander said, not loud, "bring me that scorecard." Ballard brought it up the 200 meters at something faster than a walk. He handed it to Ostrander without a word, and I saw that he handed it over, the way you hand over something you are relieved to no longer be holding, as if the paper had gotten heavy on the way up from the berm. Ostrander took it. He is a big man, broad through the shoulders, with reading glasses he keeps in his breast pocket and hates to need. He took the glasses out, he put them on, he read the card. I watched him read it. I have thought about that moment a great deal since, because it is the truest thing I saw that day. There was no drama in his face. There was no gasp. There was only a man reading a number and then reading it again, because 30 years had taught him that a number like that gets read twice before you let yourself believe it. I watched him read it the second time. I watched the color go out of his face, slow, from the top down, the way water leaves a glass when you tip it. He looked up, not at me, at the range house 40 feet behind the firing line, where a plywood board hangs on the wall under a strip of fluorescent light. The record board. Every post range has one. It is where they keep the best scores anybody has ever fired on that ground, painted on in careful stencil, name and number and year, so that the people who come after have something to shoot at. Ostrander looked at that board like a man checking a memory against a fact. Then he looked back down at the card in his hand. Then he looked at me. "What's your name, Sergeant?" he asked. His voice had changed. It had gone quiet and level and very, very careful. "Marchetti," I said. "Tessa Marchetti." I watched him not need to look at the board again. I watched him already know. Because the name was on the card in his hand, and the same name was stenciled on the plywood behind him, painted there 9 years ago under a number that had stood ever since. A number nobody on that post had touched. A number people had stopped trying to touch because trying to touch it had become a way to feel bad about yourself. 30 years, Ostrander said. He was not talking to Ballard. He was not really talking to me. He was talking to the morning. 30 years on this range, I have never seen this number written by anyone. He stopped. He turned the card so the light hit it. By anyone but the one who set the record. And then he understood that he was looking at her, at me. That the record holder was not a legend on a board and not a story the old cadre told the new cadre. The record holder was a sergeant first class in clean OCPs who had reported in 3 days ago, whom his own range sergeant had called sweetheart and told to try not to hurt herself, and who had just without a word, without a single word, put down a group that nobody on that post had matched in almost a decade. Ballard made a sound. It was not a word yet. It was the sound a man makes when the floor of his morning gives way. For a moment, nobody said anything, and in that moment, I could have ended it. I want to be honest with you about that. because it is the part of the story I am least proud of wanting and most glad I did not do. I could have stood up. I could have walked the line to where Ballard was standing, gone gray in front of his own trainees, and I could have said the sentence that would have finished him. I had it ready. I have always had it ready. 15 years of having it ready. The sentence that turns the joke around and puts the whole weight of it back onto the man who told it, in front of the exact people he told it to impress. The privates were watching, 4 of them, 19 and 20 years old, one of them a kid named Corliss with his mouth slightly open, all of them recalibrating in real time, all of them realizing that the sergeant they had been told to laugh with had picked the one person on the entire installation he should not have picked. They were ready to watch me do it. Some part of them wanted to watch me do it, because they were young, and they had just learned that authority can be wrong out loud. And there is a cruelty in the young that enjoys watching authority pay for that. And Ballard, cornered, did the thing that cornered men do. He tried to save it. "Anybody can get lucky on one string," he said. His voice was not steady. He said it anyway because he was 27 and there was a class watching, and he did not yet have the tool that lets a man stand still inside being wrong. "One good group. That doesn't." "Sergeant Ballard," Ostrander said. "I'm just saying, Master Sergeant, one string, that's." "Sergeant Ballard." Ostrander did not raise his voice. He lowered it. That is a thing the best of them can do. Lower the voice until you have to go silent to hear it. Ballard went silent. Lieutenant Prowett came over then, drawn by the stir the way lieutenants are, young himself, the range officer in charge, caught between defending the sergeant who worked for him and asking the question that everyone else already knew the answer to. He looked at the card in Ostrander's hand. He did not know what he was looking at. He looked at me, sitting on the concrete, and he looked at Ballard, coming apart, and he did the smartest thing I saw a lieutenant do that whole year, which was to say nothing and wait to be told. I stood up. I did not brush off my knees. I picked up my rifle, cleared it again out of habit, and I looked at Ballard, and I saw a young sergeant who had just discovered in the worst possible way that the world does not check with you before it puts a stranger on your line who is better at your own job than you will ever be. I decided I was not going to say the sentence. But I was not going to lie about who I was either. There is a difference, and I have spent a lot of my life learning where the line is. You do not have to humiliate a man to refuse to disappear for him. You do not owe anybody your smallness. I have watched women make themselves small on ranges and in motor pools and in briefing rooms because it was easier than the fight, and I understand exactly why they did it, and I have done it myself more times than I will admit. But I was 34 years old, and I was the incoming master gunner for that brigade, and in about a week I was going to be the person responsible for every soldier's marksmanship on that post, including Ballard's, and I could not do that job from inside a lie I had told to make a scared sergeant feel better. So I did not make myself small. I also did not make him small. I found the third thing, which is harder, and which almost nobody teaches you. "Master Sergeant," I said to Ostrander, "I'd like to fire a second string, cold, called." Ostrander looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes, and I think it was respect. And I think he understood exactly what I was doing, because he had been on ranges his whole life, and he knew that the only way to kill the word luck is to do the thing again. On purpose, out loud, with everyone watching. "Called," he repeated. "I'll call each shot before it breaks," I said. "High, low, left, right, and you can check the paper." I did not need to prove it. I want that on the record. The card in Ostrander's hand had already proven it to the one man on that post whose opinion actually mattered. But the class needed to see it. Ballard needed to see it. And there is a kind of respect you can only give a man by refusing to let him keep believing a comfortable lie, even when the comfortable lie is the one where you got lucky and he is still, secretly, the better shooter. Ostrander called the line cold. He walked me through it himself, which he did not have to do, and I understood that too. He was putting his own credibility on the line next to mine. He was telling everyone within earshot that he took this seriously. When the line was safe, he put up a fresh target himself, walked it down range, hung it, walked back. He handed me a fresh magazine. He said, "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant." I got back into the prone. I found my natural point of aim again. The wind had shifted a hair, backing off toward straight left, dropping to 4 or 5 miles an hour. I read it off the same flags in the same grass, and then I did the thing that separates people who can shoot from people who can shoot on command, in front of a crowd, with a man's pride and a record on the line, which is, I made all of that go quiet, and I got small inside the sight picture, and I let the world be nothing but a front sight and a heartbeat. "Center," I said. I pressed. The rifle broke. "Center." Center high, hair, I said, feeling the wind touch it. I pressed. Center high, hair. I called them one at a time, flat, no theater, the way you call shots to a coach. And each time the word came out of my mouth a half second before the rifle spoke. And each time Ostrander looked through his spotting scope, and I heard the small sound he made. Not surprise, confirmation. The sound a man makes when the world does exactly what a good shooter told him it would do. Calling your shots is the hardest thing there is to fake, and that is exactly why I did it. Anyone can get a good group and then tell a story about it afterward, a story where they meant every hole. But a called shot is a prediction, out loud, before the evidence exists. You are telling the world, in advance, precisely where the round is going to go, and then you have to make the world true. There is no luck in it. Luck cannot be called. When you say center high, hair, and the round goes center high, a hair, and you do it 10 times running, you have removed every explanation except the one nobody on that line wanted to accept, which was that the woman on the far lane was simply better than anything they had ever seen. I felt the wind back a little on the 6th round, and I said so before I fired. Coming left, hold half a minute right. I held it and sent it, and Ostrander's scope confirmed it, and I heard Ruiz, who had come up behind the line by then, breathe out slow. On the 8th round, a gust came through, and I did not fire. I waited. I let it blow itself out. 10 seconds, 15, the whole line holding its breath with me, and when the flags went slack, I broke the shot into the stillness and called it center, and it was center. Knowing when not to shoot is half of marksmanship, and it is the half nobody claps for, because nothing happens, and nothing happening is the most disciplined thing a shooter ever does. When the string was done, the second group was smaller than the first. Ostrander read the second card, and this time he did not go pale, because there was no more color left to lose. He read it. He took his glasses off. He folded them and put them back in his breast pocket, and he looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I did not expect. He turned to the class, the 4 privates and their sergeant, and he read the number out loud. Both numbers, the record on the board and the number I had just fired, back to back, in his flat, old parade ground voice, so there would be no version of this morning anyone could later pretend had not happened. 30 years on this range, he said again, and now he was talking to everyone. I have never seen this number written by anyone but the record holder. He looked at me, and I am looking at the record holder. Corliss, the private with his mouth open, breathed the word out before he could stop himself. That's you. I did not answer him, because it was not my sentence to say. It was Ballard's, and to his credit, and I used that word carefully, because it took more than I expected of him, Ballard said it. You're the new master gunner, he said. Quiet, not a question. I am, I said. The word went down the line the way water finds the low ground, from Ballard to the privates to Prewitt to the other cadre who had drifted over, and I watched the whole morning rearrange itself around one fact, and I watched Ballard stand inside the collapse of the thing he had built at 0940, and I felt no triumph. I want to tell you I felt triumph because it would make a cleaner story. I did not. I felt tired, the specific tiredness of having had to do it again, and under the tiredness I felt something almost like pity, because I had been the young cocky one once, sure of my ground, and the ground had gone out from under me too, and it is not a good feeling, and nobody deserves an audience for it. You run a good line, Sergeant, I said to Ballard, and I meant it because he did when he was not busy deciding who could shoot. Let's make it a better one. He looked at me like I had handed him something he did not know how to hold. The correction did not come from me. It came from inside him, and that is the only kind that ever holds. I did not report him. I did not go to the sergeant major. I did not so much as raise my voice at him that morning or any morning after. I did not need to. Because the worst correction a man can get is the one he gives himself, in the quiet, at 3 a.m, replaying the moment he called a stranger sweetheart and told her to try not to hurt herself, and then watched her put down a group he could not have shot on the best day of his life. There is no reprimand in any regulation that lands as hard as that. I know. I have replayed my own worst mornings enough times to know exactly how hard it lands. Ballard did not laugh with his trainees for the rest of that day. He ran the line, and he ran it well, sharp and safe, and by the book. And every so often, I caught him looking over at me the way you look at a thing you are trying to understand, and I let him look. I have been on the other side of a morning like that, and so I knew what his afternoon was going to be like, and I did not envy him it. There is a specific loneliness to being the person who is wrong in public. Everyone around you is careful with you, which is somehow worse than if they mocked you, because their carefulness is a mirror, and in it you can see exactly how badly you stepped in it. The privates who had laughed at his jokes at 0940 would not meet his eyes at 1400. They were not angry at him. They were embarrassed for him. And they were 19 and did not know how to hide it, and so all afternoon he ran a line full of young soldiers who kept looking at their boots. I watched him carry that. I watched him not make excuses. Not to them, not to me, not to Prewitt. He just ran the line and took his medicine 1 hour at a time, and by the end of the day, I had revised my opinion of him upward, which he did not know, and which I did not tell him, because a man has to sit in it a while before he has earned being told it is going to be all right. The word about the morning moved across the post faster than any memorandum. By evening, I could not walk through the dining facility without soldiers I had never met going quiet as I passed, then starting up again behind me. I had become, in the space of one relay, the thing I had been on the record board for 9 years, a story people told. I did not love it. Being a story is not the same as being known. A story flattens you into one morning, one group, one number, and it leaves out the childhood, and the deployments, and the year I could not touch a rifle, all the costs that made the number possible. But I understood that the story would do its work, whether I loved it or not, and that its work this time was mostly good. Because the version going around was not she embarrassed a sergeant. The version going around was do not decide who somebody is before you have seen them shoot. That is a lesson worth being a story for. The privates did not laugh either. They had learned something. I hope it was the right something. I hope it was not just that authority can be wrong, which is a cheap lesson and half of it is cruelty. I hope it was the deeper thing, which is that you cannot see what a person carries by looking at them, and that the quietest one on the line is very often the one you should not have bet against. Prewitt, the lieutenant, came and found me at the ammo point and stuck out his hand and said, "Ma'am, Sergeant, I didn't." He stopped. He started over. "Welcome to the post." It was clumsy, and it was honest, and I shook his hand and told him he had done fine, because he had. He had waited to be told. That is a rare and valuable thing in a lieutenant, and I was not going to waste it by making him feel worse than he already did. And then Ostrander walked me back to the range house, to the record board on the wall under the fluorescent light, and he stood beside me while I looked at my own name. It was strange to see it. Marchetti, T, and the number, and the year, 9 years back. I had fired that record on a cold March morning at a match I barely remembered, a younger woman, a different life, before the second deployment, before my father, before the year I could not pick up a rifle at all. I was 25 that March. It was an inter-service match, and I had come in as part of the Army Marksmanship Unit team, and this range had been one of the stops, and I had not thought anything of it at the time. That is the strange thing about records. You almost never know you are setting one. You do not feel the ground shift under you. You just have a morning where everything lines up, the wind and the light and your breath and your heart. One of those rare mornings when the rifle feels like it is doing the work and you are only there to let it. And you shoot a string and move on to the next relay and forget about it. It was months before I even learned the score had gone on a board somewhere. It was 9 years before I stood in front of that board and understood that a version of me I could barely remember had left something behind on this ground that had outlasted everyone who tried to beat it. That same year, I earned the Distinguished Rifleman Badge. It is a small thing, silver, not much bigger than a thumbnail, and if you are not part of the shooting world, you have probably never seen one, and would not know it if you did. You cannot buy it. You cannot be given it as a favor. You earn it by placing high in a specific sequence of matches over years against the best shooters the services have, and the number of people who hold one is small enough that most soldiers go a whole career without meeting one. Ostrander had seen exactly 1 in 30 years before that morning, he told me later. He had reported into me as a face in a folder, the same as everyone, and he had not known that the folder held the one badge he had spent his life respecting from a distance. I wear it low and quiet on my dress uniform, where you have to know what you are looking at to find it. My father never saw it. He died the year before. I understood I had it in me to earn it. I like to think he would have said 2 words about it. There. That one. That would have been the whole ceremony, and it would have been enough. The paint had faded a little. Nobody had touched the number since, and I understood, standing there, that for 9 years I had been a ghost on that board, a name the cadre pointed at when they wanted to make a point about what was possible, and that none of them had ever imagined the ghost would report in one Tuesday in clean OCPs and get told to take the far lane. I touched the edge of the frame. I did not say anything. Ostrander did not either. He is not a man who fills a silence just because it is there. We stood and looked at it, the old master gunner and the new one, and after a while he said, "It's good you're here," and that was all, and it was enough. That night I sat on the empty range after everyone had gone, and I let myself feel what it had cost. Because there is a cost, and the clean stories never tell you about it. The story people want is the one where the mean sergeant gets embarrassed and the underestimated woman gets her moment and the credits roll on the record board. That is a good story. It is even a true story as far as it goes, but it does not go far enough, because it stops before the part where you sit alone on the concrete at dusk and the adrenaline drains out of you and you are left with the whole long weight of what it took to be that good. It took my childhood, in a way. Other kids were doing other things while my father and I stood on a strip of dirt behind the barn, and he taught me to breathe out before the shot. It took my 20s, most of them, in the sun and the rain on ranges across 2 continents. It took the year after my father died, when I could not go near a rifle, when the smell of gun oil made me have to sit down, because the last true thing he gave me was that quiet behind the trigger, and I could not stand to be in it without him. It took 100 mornings like this one, 100 different men deciding who I was before I had said a word, 100 times having to make the target speak for me because my own voice was not going to be believed. The year after he died was the hardest year of my life, and none of it happened anywhere near a battlefield. He went quietly, the way he did everything, in a hospital bed in the town I grew up in, and I was there, and afterward I flew back to the post, and I could not pick up a rifle. I do not mean I did not want to. I mean I could not. I would put my hand on the case, and the smell of the oil would come up, and I would be 8 years old on the dirt strip behind the barn with his voice at my shoulder, and I would have to go sit down until it passed. For a shooter, for someone whose whole self is built around the quiet behind the trigger, it was like losing the use of a hand. The one place I had always been able to go to be steady was the one place I could no longer stand to be, because he was in it. And he was gone, and being in it without him was more than I could carry. I took an assignment away from the line for a while. I coached, I ran a supply room, I did the paperwork of the army, and I let the shooting sit untouched, and I told myself it was temporary, and I was not sure I believed it. What brought me back was not a breakthrough. It was just time, and a morning, an ordinary morning, when I picked up the case, and the smell came up, and I did not have to sit down. I got into the prone and I found my natural point of aim and I breathed out, and in the calm between 2 heartbeats I heard his voice, and it did not knock me over. It held me up. There. That one. I put the round in the center and I understood that he was not gone from the quiet. He was the quiet. He always had been, and I could go there and find him any time I was steady enough to make the shot. I learned to shoot from a man who never raised his voice. He was a quiet man, my father, and undemonstrative, and I spent a lot of my childhood wishing he would say out loud that he was proud of me, and he almost never did. What he did instead was stand behind me on that dirt strip and watch me shoot, and once in a great while say, "There, that one." 2 words, that one. It meant he had seen it, the shot that was already made before I touched the trigger, the letting go. It meant more than a paragraph would have. I have spent my whole life trying to be that quiet, and that's sure. I am still trying. Staff Sergeant Ruiz found me out there in the near dark. She was cadre too, one of the range NCOs, and she was the first person on that post who treated me like a soldier from the first minute, before she knew about the board, before any of it. She sat down next to me on the concrete without asking, which is its own kind of respect, and she did not say anything about the morning. She said, "You settle in okay? You need anything?" Ordinary questions, human ones, and I realized they were the first ordinary questions anybody had asked me since I reported in. And I was more grateful for them than I knew how to say. "I'm good," I told her, just sitting with it. "Long day," she said. "Long day," I agreed. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You know they're going to be different with you now, all of them. Careful." She was not wrong, and she was not only talking about Ballard, and I think she was warning me gently, in the way one woman on a hard line warns another. It gets lonely, being the one nobody can bet against. I looked at her in the near dark. She had shot her own qualification that day, quietly, competently, a solid score she had earned with none of the fuss that had swirled around mine. And it occurred to me that she understood the loneliness she was describing, because she had a smaller version of it herself, the loneliness of being good enough to be respected and not flashy enough to be seen. Most of the real work in any unit is done by people like Ruiz. Steady, unspectacular, never the story. I made a note, right then, to make sure she got seen. Because being seen by the right person at the right time is the one thing the scorebook cannot do for you, and everybody deserves it once. It does get lonely, I said, but you just made it less so. So thank you for that. She bumped my shoulder with hers, once, the way you do, and did not make it a whole thing, and that was exactly right. We sat there until the light over the record board clicked off on its timer and the range went dark, and it was just the two of us and the smell of cut grass and cold brass. And it was, I think, the moment I actually arrived at that post. Not the group, not the board. This, appear, in the dark, asking if I needed anything. Ballard came to my office 3 days later, and he took his cap off before he knocked, and that told me everything about what kind of man he was going to decide to be. I had wondered which way he would go. There are two roads out of a morning like that. One road is resentment. A man takes the humiliation, and he turns it into a grudge. And he spends the next 2 years being difficult in small, deniable ways. And he tells the story to himself in a version where you embarrassed him on purpose, where you were showing off, where it was somehow a thing you did to him instead of a thing he did to himself. I have watched men take that road. It is the easier road, going downhill the whole way, and it ends in a smaller life. The other road is harder and goes up. On that road, a man looks at the person who is better than him, and instead of hating them, he decides to learn from them. It requires swallowing something. It requires walking into the office of the woman you called sweetheart and standing there with your cap in your hands. Not many men can do it at 27. I did not expect Ballard to be one of them. I am glad I was wrong, because being wrong about people in the good direction is one of the few genuine pleasures left in this job. "Sergeant First Class Marchetti," he said from the doorway. "You got a minute?" "I do," I said. "Come in." He came in. He did not sit until I told him to. He turned his cap in his hands, and he looked at the wall for a second, gathering himself. And then he looked at me and said the thing he had come to say. "I was out of line," he said. "On the range. What I said to you." He stopped. He was not good at this. Almost nobody is. "It was wrong before I knew who you were. It would have been wrong if you'd been the worst shot on the post. I didn't. I'd like to." He set his jaw. "Teach me to run it like you shoot it." That was the apology. It was buried inside a request, which is how proud people apologize, and I recognized it, because it is how I apologize too. He was not asking me to forgive him. He was asking me to make him better. And there is no finer apology than that, because it costs more than the words, and it lasts longer, and it turns the whole ugly morning into something with a use. I took it. Of course I took it. "Sit down, Sergeant," I said. "Let's talk about your line." We talked for 2 hours. I did most of the listening, which surprised him, because I think he had come in braced for a lecture. Or worse, braced for the calm cruelty of being made to explain himself, while I sat there having already won. That is not what I wanted. What I wanted was to understand how a sergeant with his obvious strengths had ended up standing over a stranger, telling her she was wasting brass. Because if I understood that, I could fix it, and not just in him. I could fix it in the whole program. So I asked him about his own shooting. It came out slowly. He had been a decent shot as a young soldier, good enough to qualify expert, not good enough to be anything more. And somewhere along the way, he had made a quiet peace with the ceiling of his own ability by deciding that shooting was mostly talent, that you either had it or you did not, that the great ones were born and the rest of us just filled lanes. It is a comfortable belief. It lets a man off the hook for his own ceiling, and it lets him write off anybody who does not immediately impress him. And it is completely wrong, and it is the single most destructive idea in marksmanship, because it turns coaching into sorting, into deciding fast who the naturals are and abandoning everyone else. "Nobody's born able to shoot," I told him. I wasn't. I had a father with a lot of patience and a strip of dirt and 10 years. That's all a natural is. Somebody who got the patience early. I let that sit. Every soldier who walks onto your line can be made better. Everyone. Your job isn't to find the ones who already can. It's to get down in the dirt with the ones who can't yet and give them the 10 years in 10 weeks. That's the whole job, Sergeant. The rest is safety and paperwork. He was, it turned out, a good sergeant with bad habits, sharp on safety and slack on coaching, quick to write a soldier off the way he had written me off, because it was easier than the patient work of fixing a shooter one fundamental at a time. That is a fixable flaw. Most flaws are, if the person is willing and he was willing, and over the months that followed, I watched him become the kind of cadre who does not decide in advance who can shoot, who gives the quiet private in the back the same patience he gives the loud one in the front, because he had learned in the hardest way there is that you cannot tell by looking. I took over the marksmanship program that month, and I did not put my own name on anything. The record stayed on the board where it was, faded, 9 years old, and I left it there, because it was not about me anymore. It had never really been about me. What I did instead was start bringing the trainees to the board on their first day, before they fired a single round, and I would stand them in front of it and tell them what it was. Not to intimidate them. The opposite. I would tell them that every name on that plywood had been, at some point, the quietest person on some line, told to take the far lane, told they were wasting brass. I would tell them that the number was not a wall, it was a door, and that the only person who could not walk through it was the one who had already decided they could not shoot. I told them about the scorebook, too, about how it is the one advocate that never gets tired and never gets scared and never decides it likes somebody else better. I told them that on a range, more than almost anywhere else in this life, the truth is available to anyone willing to do the work to earn it, and that a target does not care who your father was, or what a sergeant said about you, or whether the world made up its mind before you got there. The target keeps an honest score. That is the mercy of it and the terror of it both. Some of them believed me. Some of them will. The rest will learn it the way I learned it, and the way Ballard learned it. One morning at a time, out on a line, with the wind quartering and the light flat, and somebody standing over them who thinks they already know the whole story. I changed a few other things, too, small things. The kind of changes you can only make once people have decided to listen to you. I made the cadre shoot the qualification alongside the trainees, in the open, posting their own scores, the way I had reported onto that range, shooting my own. It is a humbling thing for a sergeant to fire the same course as his privates and post a number they can all see, and some of them hated it at first, and all of them were better coaches within a month, because you cannot look down on a soldier struggling with a fundamental. You just struggled with yourself an hour ago. I retired the habit of the far lane, the practice of quietly parking the soldiers you had written off where they would not slow anybody down. On my ranges, there is no far lane. There is no lane for the ones you have given up on, because you do not get to give up on them. That is the job. And I kept the record on the board, faded and 9 years old, and I made myself a promise about it. The day a soldier I coached, some quiet private nobody bet on, walks up to that board and paints their own name over mine, I am going to be the happiest person on the post. That is the only kind of record worth holding, the kind you're trying to help somebody take away from you. A number on a wall is not a monument to me. It is a door I am holding open, and the whole point of holding a door is for other people to walk through it. Ballard runs a class of his own now. I watched him last week take a nervous private, a small, quiet kid who reminded me of nobody so much as a younger me, a kid two of the other cadre had already written off, and I watched Ballard get down in the dirt next to her and walk her through her natural point of aim with a patience I did not know he had in him until I taught him he did. She shot the best group of her life. He did not make a show of it. He just looked at the target and then at her, and he said, "There, that one." 2 words. He does not know where he got them. I never told him they were my father's. Some things you just pass down the line without a label, and they work anyway. So here is what I want to say to you, whoever you are, wherever you are hearing this. If you are the quiet one, the one who has been underestimated at the very thing you are best at, the one who has had to prove it again and again while people who are worse than you sail past on the strength of looking the part, I want you to know that I see you, and that the tiredness you feel is real, and that it is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is the cost of being good in a world that decides too fast. And I want to tell you the one thing 15 years and 100 ranges taught me, which is this. When someone decides who you are before you have said a word, you do not have to argue with them. Arguing is loud, and it puts you down on their ground, fighting their fight. Let the work answer instead. The work is patient. The work does not need to be believed to be true. The work keeps an honest score, whether or not anybody is watching, and one day, on some ordinary Tuesday in flat gray light, the work will speak for you so clearly that the whole line will go quiet and you will not have had to say a single word. You do not have to be loud to be sure. My father taught me that on a strip of dirt behind a barn, and I have spent my life trying to live up to it, and I am still trying, and that is all right. The trying is the thing. Load your magazine, find your natural point of aim, Breathe out, and in the calm between two heartbeats, let it go. I racked a fresh magazine, stepped up to the line, and called the range hot.